This morning's prayer is by Lynn Cox. Spirit of life, who draws us together in a web of holy relationships, make your presence known with us and in us and among us. Remind us that we are not alone in history. Ignite us with the courage of the living tradition. Remind us that we are not alone in entering the future. Anchor us with patience and perseverance. Remind us that we are not alone in our times of grief and pain. Comfort us with your Spirit, manifest in human hands and voices. Remind us that we are not alone in joy and wonder. Inspire us to honor and extend the beauty we find in this world. Divine music of the universe, let our hearts beat in diverse and harmonious rhythms, cooperating with an everlasting dance of love. May we move with the rhythms of peace. May we move with the rhythms of compassion. May we move with the rhythms of justice. Source of stars and planets and water and land, open our hearts to all of our neighbors. Open our souls to a renewal of faith. Open our hands to join together in the work ahead. So be it. Blessed be. Amen. Our reading this morning is entitled, Let Us Tell Stories of Mothers by Maureen Killeran. Let us tell the stories of mothers, stories that could be true. Let us tell of warm mothers, soft and round, likely to be found with flour on their nose, and always ready to pour you a glass of milk to go with the cookies on your plate. These mothers are increasingly rare. Let us tell of mothers who are like bubbles of champagne. They surprise your senses, leave you giggly, but when you least expect it, they erupt with an unexpected pop. Stories that could be true. Then there are grouchy mothers, stressed mothers, exhausted mothers, faces lined with worry, spirits tired and gray. Other mothers are wise and reliable, not prone to many words or to a lot of noise, but you know that when you need them, they'll be there. Let us tell of fierce mothers, the ones who will love you even when you're wrong. Let us tell also of absent mothers, whose memory shimmers at the edges of your heart. Let us tell of distant mothers, cruel mothers, loving mothers, giving mothers. There are walk away mothers, save the world mothers, too busy mothers. Mothers you cry because you lost them, and mothers who make you cry because you can't. Stories that could be true. May we hold in our hearts the mothers we have known, those who loved us and those who tried. May we forgive the mothers who didn't get it right and try to release the knots of disappointment, anger, grief, pain. May we hold in our hearts the truth that mothering, nurturing, is a task that belongs to all of us. However old or young you are, whatever your gender, may you make extra room for nurturing in your life this week. May you say something real to a harried store clerk. Give a coworker a genuine compliment. Take time to listen deeply to a friend. In our shared worship, may we remember and reflect and create anew the stories of love and nurture from this point forward, stories that can be true. Let us tell the stories of mothers, stories that could be true. This morning we share 3 mother-daughter stories with you, stories that could be true, written by Betty Williams, Kathleen Henry, and by my own mother, Lynn Wilkinson. I thank each of our authors, and I invite anyone who would like to share a story about mothers next year to let me know at some point before next spring. We'd love to have some mother and son stories to share, or stories about being a mother, stories about losing a mother, or coming to terms with an absent mother. They are so powerful, these stories. And of course, we hold with special tenderness those of you who have lost your mother this year. I know there are a number of you in the congregation. Whether our mothers were present in our lives or not, whether they were proud of us or disappointed in us, whether we strive to live up to our mother's example or strive to be nothing like our mothers, whether they are still living or whether they have passed on, our relationships with our mothers are formative ones. They set us up for so many of our spiritual lessons and are at the root of how we understand our place in the world. So this morning, let us tell the stories of mothers, stories that could be true.
Hello, my name is Betty Williams. I've been a member of this church for 8 years, and I'm very lucky to have today with me my son Jonathan Williams, my granddaughter Megan Williams, who loved my mother as I did. And this is a true story, and it's entitled, Things I Never Did. When I was 8 years old at Christmas time, my mother, my sister, and I often went into Boston by subway from Central Square, Cambridge. We would go to the Common and see the lights and the nativity scene, and then go to Liggett's drugstore and sit at the counter and have hot chocolate with whipped cream and a little bag of crackers. Then we would walk over to Louisburg Square with all the gas lanterns and look up at the windows in brick row houses, and I would imagine what it must be like to live inside. I pictured everyone dressed up beautiful and mingling about, all very sophisticated and beautiful. One year, after leaving Louisburg Square to head home to Newtown Court, the housing project we lived in Cambridge, we went by a hotel's entrance while heading to the Park Street station. There were many limos pulling up outside the hotel, and we stopped, we paused, and we looked at the arrivals in all their finery. These party-goers were African-American people, dressed to the nines, so very handsome and so very beautiful. The women all had on long gowns with fur capes over their shoulders. Their gowns were a cascade of colors, yellows, blues, reds, all lovely. The men all wore tuxedos. They were all very dashing. As I gazed in wonderment at the sight of these beautiful people entering the hotel, I realized while standing on that sidewalk that my mother had never worn an evening gown in her whole life. I felt sad, and I made a promise to myself that when I was grown up, I would buy her gowns, and she would look just as beautiful as the party-goers did on that long-ago December evening. But the years went by, and I grew up, and I never did buy my mother an evening gown, not even one. She died without ever wearing a gown. Somehow, I think I cared more about this than she did, but I will never know for sure. Maybe she would have liked being a princess, if only for one evening. During those years, each Saturday morning, my sister and I had to take turns helping our mother change the sheets. There were only flat sheets at that time. Fitted sheets were a thing of the future. So each week, the top sheet from that week was placed on top of the mattress, so it became the bottom sheet, and the top new clean sheet was placed on top and under the blanket, with the bottom sheet going into this week's wash. It was a ritual. During these alternating bed-making sessions, I realized our blankets were terrible. They were all woolen and itchy and scratchy, and they were yellow, with the bindings on the edges replaced by our mother. They were supposed to be square, but they always fit on the beds at particular angles, with one side at definite odds with the other. Later, I learned that these blankets were brought to our house by my mother's first cousin, who worked as a maid at the Mass General Hospital. When the blankets were deemed not acceptable by the hospital staff, she brought these ugly yellow blankets to our home, and I grew up with them. As the years went by, I said to my mother when it was my week to change the sheets, "When I grow up and I get a job, I'm buying you brand new blankets, soft ones with silk bindings that will match the bedspreads." My mother always smiled when I said this. It was years later when I realized I never did buy those blankets. My mother never wore slacks. She wore house dresses in the house, and skirts and blouses or dresses when she went out. Even at Rangeley, Maine, at a ski lodge, I watched her in her little boots and her winter coat, with her stockinged legs under her boots, marching along at the base lodge, waving at her 6 grandchildren, all skiing down the mountain. And I thought, I'll buy her some slacks. And I did. It was a bright red pantsuit, very popular in the mid-70s. She wore the pantsuit only once. And when she walked into our home, looking very modern and spiffy, we all clapped and cheered, and the little ones were chanting, "Grandma has pants on! Grandma has pants on!" They were more excited over her wearing pants than I ever saw them. It was a memory I will long remember, because she never wore that pantsuit again. After she died, I found it in her closet, still new and pretty, even though it was 20 years old. I missed her so much after her death in 1998, and I began thinking back to the promises I'd made, the things I would do for her when I was grown up, promises I never kept. I never bought her a gown, and I never bought her blankets that matched. Somehow the years slipped by, and the struggling days for my parents were over. They had enough money to buy their own blankets. I felt very sad that I had never done these things for her. She had done everything for me, and all I had ever done, out of the ordinary, was buy her a pantsuit, which she wore only once. If there is a heaven and she is up there, I hope she knows that I'm sorry about the never-purchased gown and the never-purchased blankets. But I'm still happy I bought the pantsuit, even if she only wore it one time, because my sister Kathy and I, and all the grandchildren and Jonathan, still have the grand memory of that magic day when Grandma wore pants. Thank you.
Things my mother taught me. My mother taught me how to read and write on a cardboard facsimile of a typewriter keyboard when I was 3 years old. She didn't just teach me the letters. I learned in QWERTY. I touch-typed my way into kindergarten. But most of all, my mom taught me pies. Her crust was an Irish crust, no frills, no butter. She made a concession to health, choosing Crisco as opposed to lard, but that was her only concession where her crust was concerned. The key lesson was to handle it rarely and lightly. She explained the heat of your hands made the crust come out tough. Too much water, and you were sunk. Too little water, and you wouldn't be able to roll the thing out. I have graduated in my adulthood to a Frenchy version, pastry, not crust, where chilled butter cut into quarter-inch pieces gets incorporated into the flour. I even use a food processor now after balking at doing so for nearly 50 years. For those first 50 years of my baking pies, I followed my mother's way exactly. My Irish crust tasted each and every time the same, plain and simple. Now, my new recipes flake and crumble just right and melt in your mouth and add immeasurably to the whole pie experience, but I think of her with every change I make. People say to me, "You make your crust from scratch? Why would you make your crust from scratch?" They are thinking of the perfectly fine prepared products in the supermarket, some even rolled out in a pie plate for you. Cut some fruit, season it, plop it into the shell, pop it in the oven, and you have baked a pie. And it tastes fine. And it's certainly easy, so why do I make my crust from scratch? I take in the flour through my senses. I smell its roasty smell. The flour feels cool at first touch, even on a hot day. Cool as if it's been in the shade a while. The dust of it rises a little, and there's a heavy clunk sound as I drop cupfuls into the bowl. All this has happened, and I haven't done a thing yet. I add the salt, a pinch, and I feel it against my fingertips as I rub it slightly together to grind it down a bit. Sometimes there's a little of that finger rubbing with a bit of sugar too. The fat comes next, some version, combination of butter and lard, Crisco. Recipes say things like it should look like cornmeal or bits the size of peas or chickpeas, but you know when it's right. The magic begins with the moisture. When I do my mother's recipe, I add cold water 1 tablespoon at a time, and these are her quite ancient. I think they're about 70 years old, these tablespoons. You add the cold water 1 teaspoon at a time into each quadrant of the bowl, tablespoon at a time. Using a fork then to mix 1 quadrant before you move on to the next. Her recipe calls for 4 or 5 tablespoons. And you know you are a better person if you can do it in 4. Your crust will be flakier and you will be perfect. So you divide the bowl into the quadrants, and only if you need to, you throw in that last tablespoon, the 5th, over the whole mass. Most times I need all 5, being not a perfect person yet. Each time I do it, I think how she did it. I think this is how we do it, Mom, each time. And that is surely why I never buy a crust all prepared and presented in a package at the supermarket. I have my mother's pie plate still, metal and drab, and she actually got it for nothing because it says New England Table Talk on the inside. Hundreds of pies made from this plate. She made apple, of course, pumpkin and mincemeat for the holidays, lemon meringue in the summer, and blueberry. On rare occasions, she would make strawberry rhubarb. She never made a cream or custard pie or any newfangled kind made with a Jell-O product. They were not pies. They were desserts, but they were not pies. She taught me these things. Her nose narrowed and mine doesn't, but her cheeks, eyes, and brows, her lips, her teeth, square and a little yellowed, those are mine. Her hair, thick and heavy and slow to gray. My mother's hair is my hair, too. The diagnosis landed one July that it was lung cancer squared with what I'd already figured. All my relatives die of lung cancer. Dad did, Mom's 2 brothers, a nephew, although his death could have been AIDS called cancer because it was only 1982 and no one admitted Johnny was gay. Mom decided to forego treatment. We'd seen how chemo and radiation had shrunken Dad, brittle, a blackened wick in a stump of wax, no light left. She said, "I've lived a full life." She'd seen the Sox win the series, and me marry the woman who loved me with her whole heart. Besides, she'd get to keep her hair. A look-alike parent can startle you from the mirror, freezing you for a slip of a minute into a gap between what is now and real and what was then and gone. When my dead mother stares back at me from the mirror on some ordinary Tuesday morning, I think, I am old. And then I think, great hair, Mom. Great hair. And thanks for the pie.
One more story. My mother wrote this piece in 1999 about her own mother, and that's where she is today, driving down to Connecticut to visit with her mother. This past winter, she writes, I saw an exhibit at the Duxbury Art Complex entitled Immortalized. The exhibit included works by 18 different artists, each immortalizing a loved one through works of art in different mediums: photography, oils, video, cloth sculpture. Many of the artists were women paying tribute to their mothers, and their presentations all revealed the undeniable connections between mother and daughter, regardless of how the two diverged in lifestyle and interests. The strength of the mother-daughter relationship was a recurring theme in the show. The work that spoke most directly to me was by Sarah Hutt, entitled My Mother's Legacy. It consisted of 400 wooden bowls of various dimensions, each with a pithy statement about her mother burned into the bottom. These bowls were piled on 4 tables, and the visitors were invited to pick up the bowls and read the ones that were covered by others. Altogether, the artist had made 1,000 of these bowls, but only 400 were included in the exhibit. The statements attributed to her mother were sometimes humorous. My mother says that if you always win the game, no one will want to play with you. Sometimes personal. My mother read at the kitchen table. But they were also somehow universal. Some made me smile, some brought tears to my eyes. Some I read and said to myself, oh yes, my mother says that too. I thought at the time that I'd like to do something like this about my mother. Not burn the sayings into the bottom of bowls, but just write down some things about her. So off the top of my head, the following is the very random list that I wrote. My mother is a hard worker. has inculcated the Protestant work ethic into my sister and me. Always wore a gardenia corsage on Easter, which my father had given her. Taught me the names of flowers and plants when I was a child. Knows all of the bird calls. Sang in a women's choral group that rehearsed at our house when I was a child. Grows tomatoes in large planters on her patio. Loves clothes. Loves nice things. Makes muffins for her minister. Just saying. Banana nut. Likes a lot of attention. Is on the altar guild at her church. Says you get further with honey than with vinegar. Is a great worrier. Makes sweaters for family members for Christmas. Is a frugal Yankee. Takes pride in her lineage. Wants In the Garden sung at her funeral. Is a good friend. Loves her cats. Avoids open conflict. Doesn't like to ask anyone for anything. Loves to watch the birds at her bird feeders. Loves to watch the sunsets over the salt marsh and river behind her house. Jumps up when the clothes dryer buzzer goes off. Gave my sister and me home permanents the week before school started each year. Cares about appearances. Makes great apple pies. And says, apple pie without the cheese is like a hug without a squeeze. Kept loving vigil through the many months my father was dying. Didn't let us have a television in the house when we were growing up. Has a good sense of humor. Has friends of all ages. Does not like to talk about feelings. But tells me she loves me before ending our phone conversations. I don't know if I could list 1,000 things about my mother as Sarah Hutt did. I bet you're glad I didn't do it here, she says. But these are the things that immediately popped into my mind. I invite you each to think about your mothers and do this same exercise. I am very lucky that my mother is still living, and I think I'll share this with her on Mother's Day, which she did back in 1999. I think I'll also share this with my daughters. I invite you to share with your mother, if she is still living, the things that are special about her. Even the most mundane things are special. And if your mother is not still living, share these things with your children or with your friends. By doing so, we can honor our mothers and grandmothers and acknowledge that undeniable connection that we share. Happy Mother's Day, my mother wrote, and blessed be. Indeed, happy Mother's Day. Amen, and blessed be. And thank you.